The moment the new Vice President of Operations, Sterling Vance, called my compliance department a legacy drag on our scalability, I knew the company was already a ghost ship. I was sitting at the edge of the conference table, watching him toss around high-octane buzzwords like hyper-growth, agile integrated workflows, and global optimization. He had that specific, polished smile, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes, practiced in front of a mirror until it looked sincere enough to sell a lie. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian wool suit that probably cost more than the monthly salary of the data entry clerks he was planning to fire next. I just sat there, my hands folded, watching the slow-motion collision of ignorance and arrogance. My name is Elena Ross, and for 12 years, I had been the silent architect of Sentinel Global Logistics. While the executives were busy playing golf with potential investors and inflating stock projections, I was the one keeping the company out of federal prison. I survived 3 different CEO shakeups, 2 massive Department of Transportation, DOT investigations, and a catastrophic supply chain fraud scare that almost wiped us off the map back in 2018. I was never the person who stood up in meetings to claim credit. I lived in a world of thick audit binders, color-coded government regulation manuals, and encrypted data tracking software that I had personally designed to keep our international shipping routes compliant. I was the person who caught the mistakes before the federal auditors even realized they existed. Sterling Vance walked into the company like he was auditioning for a Netflix drama. He was fresh out of a high-end business school, armed with a portfolio of success stories that involved cutting staff to boost quarterly margins. Within 3 weeks, the office culture had completely shifted. Experienced department heads were replaced by consultant teams, who spent their entire day in meetings about meetings. Cubicles that once held experts were now empty, quiet, and cold. At first, he ignored me. Then he began to treat me like a piece of broken furniture. Meetings that I had chaired for over a decade suddenly shifted to executive-only sessions. Vendor compliance audits, which were the lifeblood of our international insurance coverage, were reassigned to a junior analyst named Trey, a guy who spent more time adjusting his tie in the reflection of his monitor than he did reading the actual contract clauses. I knew exactly what the game was. Sterling thought my role was a relic of the past, a salary that could be redirected into his efficiency budget. He didn't understand that Sentinel Global Logistics wasn't just a shipping company. It was a highly complex, legally fragile structure held together by specific federal credentials and verified safety protocols. My credentials weren't just titles. They were the legal keys to our ability to operate on U.S. soil. Then came the Friday meeting. It was billed as a structural realignment. Sterling clicked through a PowerPoint deck that looked like it was stolen from a LinkedIn influencer's feed. When he got to the slide labeled Resource Optimization, he looked directly at me. "Elena," he said, that smug grin spreading across his face, "we've decided that your oversight role has been fully automated and offloaded to our new offshore partners. Your position is officially redundant as of 5 p.m. today." The room went silent. The other executives kept their eyes on their pads, too afraid to be the one who looked at the person being fed to the wolves. I didn't blink. I didn't get angry. I didn't give him the dramatic scene he clearly wanted. I simply reached into my bag and placed my primary authorized officer, PAO, badge on the table. It was a heavy matte black identification card with a distinct gold foil federal emblem. Sterling laughed. "What's that? Your souvenir?" "It's the authority," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. Without this designation, the Federal Logistics Portal will lock every active contract tied to our serial numbers within an hour. You're not just firing me, Sterling. You're turning the keys to the kingdom over to a void." He waved his hand dismissively at his assistant. "Trey, take it. Process her clearance. We have a company to run." I stood up, handed a flash drive containing my final transition reports, which were completely useless without my encrypted credentials, to the HR manager, and walked out. I didn't look back. I just listened to the sound of my footsteps echoing through the lobby, leaving the arrogance behind. Saturday morning in my kitchen felt strangely quiet. I sat with a cup of black coffee, watching the sunrise, and systematically began the process of decommissioning the legacy. One by one, I revoked my digital authority from the Sentinel Global Logistics backend. I deactivated the encrypted audit keys, wiped the secondary validation strings for the federal shipping portal, and finally, purged the administrative access tokens that allowed the internal mainframe to communicate with the Department of Transportation's verification servers. I didn't break a single rule. I simply fulfilled the legal requirement to revoke my credentials as soon as my authorized officer status was terminated. By noon, Sentinel Global Logistics didn't just have a new compliance strategy. They had no compliance authority at all. Monday morning, the fallout began in a way I had predicted, but even I was surprised by the speed of the disintegration. By 7:30 a.m., my personal phone, a burner I kept for emergencies, started lighting up with frantic, rhythmic vibrations. I ignored every single call. Down at the hub, the reality of the lockout was beginning to bleed into their morning operations. When the overnight freight shipments attempted to log into the federal portal for automated gate release, the system rejected the handshake because the authorizing signature no longer existed. Within an hour, hundreds of shipping containers were paralyzed at the loading docks. Sterling Vance, ever the optimist, attempted to force the issue. He tried to bypass the lockout by having Trey, the junior analyst, manually input the override codes. It was a disastrous move, because the system was designed with fail-safe accountability. Attempting an unauthorized override without the primary officer's digital token triggered an automatic Level 1 regulatory freeze. By 10 a.m., the federal system didn't just lock the portal. It flagged the entire company's primary routing ID as under investigation. I watched the live updates on a public logistics tracker from my laptop. Every single flight path and rail route associated with Sentinel turned from a healthy, pulsing green to a flat dead gray. The legal team was in a state of total panic. I knew this because a frantic text from the head attorney, a man who had previously ignored every warning I sent, popped up on my screen. "Elena, the portal is showing a total breach error. We need the root authentication key immediately. Call us." I didn't reply. I simply watched as the disaster compounded itself. Because I had spent 12 years building the compliance architecture, I knew that without that specific key, the company's internal database would undergo a mandatory reconciliation process that took 48 hours, an eternity in the logistics world. By Tuesday, the silence from the office was replaced by the noise of the external world. News of the Sentinel freeze hit the business wires. Competitors began poaching our desperate clients, and the company's stock price began a vertical descent. Sterling Vance had disappeared from the office floor entirely, leaving his consultants to face the wave of furious warehouse managers and stranded logistics partners. He had wanted to streamline the company, and in a way, he had. He'd stripped it down to absolutely nothing. I took a long walk through the city park that afternoon, enjoying the crisp air, knowing that back at the office, they were finally realizing that the most expensive, deadweight they had ever cut, was the only thing keeping them from the ground. By Wednesday morning, the office atmosphere had shifted from frantic panic to a hollow, suffocating silence. The innovation hub they had created was now a morgue of empty terminals and flashing error screens. I was sitting on my back porch with a book and a fresh cup of tea, intentionally keeping my phone on Do Not Disturb, when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. It was the company founder, Arthur Sentinel, a man I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. He stepped out of the car looking significantly older, his tailored suit rumpled and his face pale. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just walked up to the porch. "Elena," he started, his voice cracking. "The federal auditors are in the building. They've frozen every single liquid asset we have because the contract reconciliations aren't passing. Vance has gone into hiding, and the legal team is telling me there's no way to manually bypass the lockout without a registered officer's digital signature." I didn't offer him a seat. I just looked at him with the quiet composure of someone who had spent 14 years preparing for this exact moment. I warned the board 4 times over the last 2 years that the compliance architecture was nearing capacity and needed formal succession planning. I said softly, "You chose to replace that stability with Vance's lean infrastructure." "I made a mistake," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Name your price, re-register, sign the overrides, and we'll fire Vance and his entire consultant team. We can give you equity, a board seat, anything." I stood up and looked him in the eyes. "You think this is about money, Arthur, or a title? You outsourced the soul of this company to someone who treated accountability like an inconvenience. The systems aren't broken. They are functioning exactly as I programmed them to. They are protecting the public from a company that stopped caring about the rules." I handed him a manila envelope. Inside were copies of every internal memo I had written regarding the risks of the new compliance strategy, all of which had been ignored by the executive office. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. "I am legally separated from your infrastructure, and I intend to stay that way. If the system is frozen, it's because it's no longer safe for you to operate." He left without another word, looking like a man who finally realized he had traded a fortress for a house of cards. By the afternoon, the news broke. Sentinel Global Logistics had officially filed for emergency restructuring. The company was being dismantled, its contracts were being auctioned off to competitors, and Sterling Vance was reportedly under investigation for corporate fraud and gross negligence. I never went back. I didn't need to watch them pack their boxes. I didn't need the apologies, and I certainly didn't need the equity. People often mistake compliance for a limitation, but it is actually the bedrock of power. Those who ignored that power learned the hardest way possible, that when you try to replace a foundation with a buzzword, the whole building falls. I poured a glass of wine, sat back, and listened to the silence of a house that was, finally, peacefully, mine again.